So welcome everyone to this episode of Over Yonder. Today we are joined by Cassie Chambers. So to give you a little brief bio on Cassie, Cassie Chambers grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Her earliest memories are of playing on her grandparents' farm in Owsley County, Kentucky, and exploring the campus of Berea College with her mother and father. Cassie graduated from Yale College, the Yale School of Public Health, the London School of Economics, and Harvard Law School, where she was president of the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau. This is a student-run law firm that represents low-income clients. Chambers then received a Skadden Fellowship to return to Kentucky to do legal work with domestic violence survivors in rural communities. In 2018, she helped pass Jeanette's Law, which eliminated the requirement that domestic violence survivors pay an incarcerated spouse's legal fees in order to get a divorce. She's a lawyer and the current vice chair of the Kentucky Democratic Party. She lives in Louisville with her husband, Brian, their dog, Brixton, and their cat, Spaghetti. And you have a 1-year-old now as well.
I do. My 1-year-old Cooper since that bio was put together. So yeah, busy household, especially during quarantine.
Awesome. And Cassie is also the writer of Hill Women, which the reason that I'm doing this Over Yonder episode and not Dr. Price is because I actually taught Hill Women for the course that I taught last semester at the University of Kentucky. And Cassie, just to give you a little idea, so a couple of comments. I had so many positive reactions to Hill Women, but just a few that I thought you might want to hear. One of my students said, "When I started reading Hill Women, I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting into. I enjoyed Clay's quilt a lot, and I was concerned that since the story wasn't fiction, it might be harder to get through. However, I could not have been more wrong. The story is real, it's raw, and it's powerful." And then another comment was, "As I have read this book, I discussed it over and over again with my parents and friends, who then discussed it with their friends. With one purchase of this book, I think at least 20 people have shifted the way that they think about Appalachia."
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah,
well,
direct quote, just copy and pasted.
Yeah. Well, I will say it's really interesting, when you write a book, it didn't occur to me until like right before it was published that people were actually going to read it. It was more this, oh, I got to write this book. I got to get it to the publisher. It's this project. And then all of a sudden, I realized, wow, anyone can go into a bookstore and buy it and read my personal thoughts. I mean, I think that's the thing about memoirs. You have to like be very exposed and very vulnerable. And so I'm always kind of honored and flattered and still a little surprised when people actually take the time to read it, because I know what an investment of time it is to sit down, and we're all so busy and spend the time reading a book. So always nice to hear any comments, but particularly really nice, thoughtful ones like you just read.
Yeah, well, it was wonderful and much needed. And, I've from Appalachia. I was born in Parkersburg, West Virginia. So my whole mom's side of the family were Methodist ministers, and my whole dad's side of the family worked in the steel mills. And so I saw so much of my family in this book too. And I know that I'm definitely not alone in that. So we are all excited that you wrote it and you took the leap of faith. So that's fantastic. So one of the first questions we've asked every one of our Over Yonder guests, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but is this your first pandemic?
This is my first pandemic. It's interesting. I do have a master's degree in public health, so I've studied pandemics. But the thought of actually living through one had never crossed my mind as a possibility. And so it is, just been a very interesting experience. I feel like it's been a constant sort of moving target to adjust. And, I recognize that we're very fortunate that a lot of people have it a lot worse off than we do. And we've all been healthy, and all of our families stayed healthy. And we've had flexibility in our jobs, but still kind of figuring out how to rearrange your life to work from home and to chase a 1-year-old and to get things done in new and different ways has been an experience I think we are all sharing.
Yes, that's right. So actually that's a good segue into my next question. So have you been able to work from home? Like, did you have a home office setup before all this started? Like, how has this changed, how you do what you do every day?
Yeah, so I have a old discarded dining room table in the attic of our house, which is until recently, it was like 105 degrees, no matter what time of year it was. It was just so hot constantly. And so I would have to work early in the morning and then just, like blow fans on myself to try to work as long as I could. And we just recently got like some air conditioning up there, which was a game changer. But yeah, it was figuring out how to work at home and how to do that. My husband and I sort of started trading off. I would have the baby in the morning, he would have him in the afternoon, and then we would just try to get work done and ignore the occasional either screaming or very loud giggling that comes with having a 1-year-old in the house constantly.
Yeah, I feel like in the beginning, at least this was my experience, like, a cat would walk across the laptop and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And my Zoom that I had yesterday, you had one woman like holding her baby on her hip, like people's dogs were sitting in their laps, people's spouses were walking back and forth, like with their microwave meals. Like, I feel like people have just sort of accepted, like, this is just where we're at,
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it's a bad thing, honestly. I think all of us were juggling all of these different parts of our identities before, be it being parents or spouses or significant others or children or, anything. And we just felt the need to hide it more. It was like, oh my goodness, I can't be seen as, actually having my 1-year-old in a workplace setting, how unprofessional. But I think it's good that now we're all just being a little more honest about who we are and the things that we're juggling, and it's a little more exposed and on display. And I hope that's something that we keep out of this pandemic, is this realization that, like, even though you don't see me as a parent in a traditional typical workspace, that's still something that's going on in my life. And I think the more that employers and coworkers and all of us can just realize that, I think better off we'll be.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I've thought about that a lot too. I don't have kids, but I have 3 dogs. 3 dachshunds, so they're very vocal, but they're a huge part of my life. And now it's weird that all these coworkers have seen them and know, and they're like, oh, how's Otto doing today, or how's Strudel doing today? And it's like, kind of opened up this different world.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
nice. So that actually, again, you're like reading my mind here. So one of the other questions we ask is post-pandemic, which supposedly there will be a post-pandemic at some point.
So they say.
What's something that you hope stays? What's something that you learned from this moment, or you've seen others learn from this moment that you hope sticks around?
I really like the way that we've found to connect virtually with people. For me, it's given me a chance to, because I did spend this chunk of my life traveling all over the world and going to these different schools. And I'm always so busy in the present. I always mean to stay in better touch, but it just kind of, it's much easier when you're like, oh, I'm going to this event, I'm going to see my friends, than to sort of take the time to catch up with people who live in different parts of the world. It just feels further away. And so I really like the way that it's made it so that we can connect with anyone, anywhere. I had never used Zoom. I never used any sort of virtual video phone calls before this. And so I'm hoping that, at least for me personally, that's my goal, is to stay in touch with those people I've been able to reconnect with because of people's increasing comfort with Zoom and because of the new technologies that we've all adopted.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you finished your book.
I
Um,
did.
what have you been up to since then? I mean, I guess, what has sort of post-publication life been like for you?
Yeah, it was really interesting because the book came out in January, and then, sort of around the time that it was beginning to sort of take off even more in the press, and we had a lot of exciting events lined up, and things were starting to feel like they were coming together. This pandemic hit, and so all of the TV appearances and radio appearances, all of a sudden everyone was like, we don't have time to talk about books, we don't have time to talk about art. Understandably, there's a pandemic, and so it was a lot of learning to live with that changing world, and recognizing that there are bigger things going on in the world than book promotion, and that's an okay thing. And it's still recently, I think people have started getting to a place where now they've sort of adjusted to the new normal. They're interested in, they're quite frankly at home and bored and looking for podcasts and books and whatnot. So it's been interesting to see how I think book sales across, I imagine, the entire industry have slowly begun ticking up again. And there's more media attention and more interest in authors and books and whatnot.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, definitely. I mean, I've always been an avid reader, but I'm like inhaling books this year, especially, just because I told a friend of mine, I said, I think it's a mix of like escapism and also like you just have time to read more.
Yeah.
There's nothing that makes you appreciate your life more than reading sometimes about these experiences of others where you're just like, I mean, my gosh, you get to sort of tour in other people's lives, and sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it ends up being really heartbreaking.
Yeah. No, I find it's nice to read about like normal lives where people aren't in quarantine and socially distancing and, interacting. And it's the same thing. Like I found myself watching a lot of kind of mindless television and just kind of appreciating the fact that it displays a sense of normalcy that, I know that we will get back to. And each day we are one day closer to it. But, sometimes you wonder when it's coming. And so I think it's good to have those representations, be it in books or TV or however you like to get it. Just to remind yourself that someday soon we will have big gatherings of folks and we will, all come together in these ways that we used to.
I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes when I'm watching like a TV show and I see two people hug, I think, oh, like, you can't be doing that. Like, my brain has been so rewired now, to sort of like throw up the alarm when I see that. And speaking of books, I I think you'll appreciate this. I was like shopping around for my next book, and when I was at Joseph Beth with my mask and everything, trying to sort of hustle. And I saw Station 11, and I had a bunch of friends recommend that book to me, and I hadn't read it, and it had been like a couple years, and so I picked it up and I started reading it the other day. And I don't really read anything about it before I started reading it. And for those who are watching this who don't know, Station 11 is about an dystopian world that after a pandemic that killed 99% of the population. So I started reading it, and I was like, this was not a good choice.
Maybe not the right book for right now.
Yeah. So speaking of books, what is on it can be books that you've read during the pandemic or just all-time favorite books. What's on your sort of recommended book list?
Oh, so I have been reading a bit over the pandemic too. I just finished two that I really liked. One is called The Ones We've Been Waiting For. It's sort of a political memoir about millennial leadership, both Democrat and Republican. Follows like real sort of superstar millennial leaders. And I thought it was really interesting. It just talks about the moments that have shaped this next generation of political leaders and sort of it mixes psychology and sociology along with sort of this narrative storytelling that follows different people throughout their lives. And so it was great. And I also read Where the Crawdads Sing, which I think a lot of people have read. I was a little late to the game, but it is just a beautifully written book, intriguing. I read the entire thing in one day because I couldn't put it down. And so I highly recommend it as well.
That is such a great book. It was funny because my partner and I had somewhere to go on the day I started that book. And we were like running errands or something beforehand. And every time I brought it in the car with me, and he was like, "Are you not going to go inside?" I was like, "Nope, I'll be here. I'm fine. Just leave the air conditioning running." But I actually got to meet Delia Owens at Joseph Beth. Yeah, she
That's
came.
really cool.
And I always like to, there's an event planner at Joseph Beth who I won't name, who's great. We work closely together because of games programming, and he will usually kind of spill the tea about authors, I was like, is this person nice? Was this person, it's just kind of fun to think about that. And so I went up to him and I was like, so Delia, was she like, and he said, she's probably one of the nicest, if not the nicest guest we've ever hosted here.
That's awesome.
So we can all feel good for supporting her.
Yeah, well, and it's just, like you said, an insanely compelling book that's impossible to put down. So yeah, I recommend it to anyone who is looking for a read. And I think, I don't know how you found it. It was a pretty fast read. I mean, part of it again was not being able to put it down, but it was not, it wasn't super dense. It wasn't hard to get through.
Definitely. And it's sort of similar to Silas House, I thought, in a sense that like the landscape doesn't read like boring to me in a way. Like the landscape is so dynamic, and that's how it is in his books too. And so it keeps me going. It feels like a character, like its own character.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, before we started this, we were talking a little bit about, portrayals of Appalachia and the way that a lot of times it's portrayed as this negative place. And I kind of got the sense that this was in some ways, although a fiction story and very like narrative driven and character driven, also trying to kind of reframe the way that we think about that particular part of the country too, or the way that historically people have thought about it. So something in common there.
Absolutely. And a strong female lead, which is always
Yeah.
nice to see.
Yep. I always like to read books about strong women.
Yes, yes, me too. So I actually only have one more question, and this is another little sort of oddball one that we're asking everybody. So there's a lot of emphasis right now on health and staying healthy and immune boosters and all that stuff. So do you have any home remedies that you sort of like are super loyal to that you can share with us?
You know, just I'm trying to think. My great grandma is a big believer that like black tea cures everything. And so I don't know. I've never heard anyone else that sort of believes in the power of just like your standard English breakfast tea like she does. And so I think just for whatever ails you, my instinct is like, well, I just need a cup of tea and I'll feel fine, be it like an emotional wound or a physical wound or, whatever's going on. I'm just a cup of tea and everything will be okay. I will say I know this isn't a remedy in the typical sense, but I'm a big believer in like getting outside, sort of like exercising your body, like finding a connection to nature or to the world around you. And so I think for me, so much has changed in the world just in terms of what our days look like. And I try to find time to like get outside and like walk in the park or go on a jog or something like that, just because that's something that really hasn't changed. The green spaces are still the same. There are more people with masks in the park, which is a good thing. But, in terms of the background and the way that activity feels, it's sort of a sense of normalcy. And I think for me, it's really important to be able to have that connection and also that kind of physicality of getting out and moving your body in the world, which is something that we're all, the distance we travel on any given day is now a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah, that's very true. Now you're in Louisville, so where do you go to sort of connect back with nature? That's where I'm from. I, went to Manual for high school.
Okay.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
parents live way out in Shelbyville though. They're like, we grew up in Simpsonville, so we had lots of land, but I know sometimes in certain areas of Louisville it can kind of be hard to find that green space.
Yeah, I live close to Cherokee Park, which is like sort of the big central park in Louisville. It's within walking distance and actually kind of a nice walk to get there. And so it's interesting, it has this sort of main loop. And I used to largely, if I was jogging or walking, just stick to the main loop because that was what I was used to. And honestly, I was usually probably rushing to fit in my outdoor time anyway. And I will say since the pandemic hit, I've had more of a chance to really explore the park. It's really one of the only places that I can take my 1-year-old to kind of do something that's not sitting in our house. And so I've realized how many trails there are and how many sort of hidden pathways, how much larger the park is than you sort of even realized. And so it's been nice to kind of explore it and feel like I'm getting to know this really beautiful space that's, practically in my backyard, get to know it a little bit better.
Awesome. So final question, is there going to be a Hill Women 2? Are you looking to publish another book? I know they say you should never ask an author this after they publish. You should never ask an author when their book's going to be done or if they're going to write another one. But I'm going to pick on you a little bit and ask anyway.
No, please. I will say what I've realized through the process of writing Hill Women is the power of storytelling and particularly of women in traditionally marginalized areas telling their stories and how that creates both change in sort of individual circles, individual mindsets, but also how it leads to policy change. I think that was the story I learned with passing Jeanette's Law is you tell a compelling story and the world changes in response to it. And so one thing that I'm working on is this idea of like a Hill Women Foundation to do sort of storytelling workshops and help women figure out how to find their voices and to use their voices to advocate for systemic change. So that's something coming down the pipeline, you know, both women in Eastern Kentucky and in Appalachia, and also, you know, women who live in urban poverty or, you know, all sorts of communities that need to have their voices raised and elevated. I'm currently beginning to chew over a second book idea. I recently won a seat on the Louisville Metro Council. And
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm sort of navigating public life as a mom of young children and beginning to think about the ways that sort of public mothering is difficult and interesting and something, you know, why don't we have more women with children of a certain age in our public sphere and participating in public life? We tend to tell women you can be involved in the public eye either before you have children or after your kids are a certain age. And so there's this sort of segment of society where we say, or segment of time that we tell women, oh, you know, you can't be in the public eye right now. And so I'm beginning to sort of think about this idea of public mothering and ways to talk about it and tell stories about it and elevate, again, other women's voices of women who are kind of living that experience.
That's fantastic, and really, really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Cassie, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time with us, and we hope that once everything's back up, you know, post-pandemic, we can bring you in for a visit or something to the Gain Center.
That'd be great.
You know, workshop or something. I would love it.
I would love that too. And thanks for inviting me. And it's been a pleasure to speak with you.